Welcome to another edition of Everyone Hates Cleveland, the podcast. My guest is different today. Actually, I don't know why I call people a guest on this thing. My co-host, it's the guy that they drag around. I don't know. No Mike Hattery tonight. Tonight is Gage Will. I don't even know if I can call you a newcomer at this. To me, you're a newcomer because I haven't written anything since you've been there. But we've been planning this podcast since I think the week before we announced that you were part of WFNY. Yep. Gage, it's finally happening. You've finally been able to finagle time with a youngin' and trying to be a good husband.
Trying. So
it's good to finally have you on board. How's it feel to be writing at WFNY? We kind of followed the same path. Both of us wrote at IBI for a while and made our way to WFNY. How's it feel in your first month and a half, I guess, at WFNY?
I'm enjoying it. I like that WFNY has. I like being involved with all the other sports as well. Not writing on them, but just seeing the conversation about them beyond baseball. But the group of people at WFNY are great.
If only the people could see the conversations we have on Slack off air. Like that's the money. I'm telling you, that's the money. What we ought to do is just transcribe those into the podcast, and our following would triple. All right, let's get into it. That's the topic in our corner of the world, which is probably a small corner, but has been Tito Francona and Terry Francona. And let's just, with the playoffs going on, it's tied at 2-2. Obviously, the conversation shifts when you lose a couple of games, but there's been a lot of banter about Terry Francona and decision-making. And it seems kind of odd to go down this path because, okay, you know, if I were to run through the managers that have managed the Indians since I was born in 1971, it's a cornucopia of really bad managers or really mediocre managers.
We don't have time for all that either, Jim.
Yeah, no. Well, I'm old. I'm running out of time here, so we got to go fast. But, you know, I mean, obviously Terry Francona and the pantheon of managers and the history of the team, you know, past Lou Boudreau, of course, and a few others. Obviously, Terry Francona, possible Hall of Fame manager, probable Hall of Fame manager. Now, obviously, in the pantheon of managers, he's, if not the best, one of the best. Right. Probably in our lifetimes, the only other guy you can talk about on performance-wise is Mike Hargrove. And you can we can argue about, you know, performance there as opposed to the team that he had. Of course, that mammoth offensive team that he had. That being said, you know, a lot of critiquing going on with the way that Terry Francona, it's these little things, you know, managing a roster, how he's kind of created this roster without a lot of back-end offense. Then you lose a guy like Edwin Encarnacion. Then you have a couple of guys like Jose Ramirez and Francisco Lindor struggle. And all of a sudden you're looking at Eric Gonzalez and Gio Urshela and a bunch of other guys that kind of we've been questioning. So I just want to throw this out here. Your first question on the podcast, not you know, you're going to probably lose 100 followers in this discussion. But, you know, your thoughts on this. I think the big question here, Gage, is, you know, is it okay to critique a guy who clearly knows more about baseball than we do, looking back upon the game, you know, especially with the Urshela errors and stuff like that? What are your general thoughts on Francona as a whole? Because you got to go big picture on this before you fine-tune it to this playoff series, and then kind of tune it down to that. You know, what are your thoughts on Francona?
Well, I kind of come out on Francona. He's obviously the players guy and gets a lot out of his players. He's got a great feel for the clubhouse. That can't be taken away from him. There are a lot of tactical decisions he's made that I've taken issue with, but mostly I think Francona is he's obviously a good manager and obviously knows a lot more about baseball than I'll learn in the next 30 years. But he's I also think that a lot of the love he gets goes a little overboard because, honestly, baseball managers, the decisions they make just don't have that much impact on or as much impact as it would seem from just talking about it. We can overanalyze.
Yeah, I mean,
go ahead.
I mean, it's just, you know, when you look at this big picture, and when I talk about the big picture of the season, you know, you can point to bunt usage, little things that he does, you know, how maybe he handles when he kind of grabs hold of some guys that you kind of scratch your head about, starting with Michael Martinez last year and moving into this year, as a matter of fact, how he utilizes certain players. When you are in a playoff series like this and all of a sudden you lose a couple of games, especially in a game like last night, are these the things he does good is magnified like last year with how he was sort of forced into using the rotation and the bullpen in this kind of multi-use way that you're seeing a ton now. Whereas this year you're seeing all of a sudden Encarnacion is hurt, Lindor struggling, JRam struggling, and now like last night you basically had Brantley who's basically taking spring training at bats, Chisenhall who is basically taking spring training at bats and who they literally used as a decoy a couple games ago. How critical can we get on this guy who last year, looked like MacGyver of managers, Band-Aid and gum and tape, and somehow we make it to one hit away from a World Series. Is it fair to crash down upon him if we lose this series to the Yankees based on roster construct and these little kind of weird decisions that he's been making?
Well, as we fine-tune it to this series, the crash down on him, I think that might be part of a reaction of all the praise that he got last year that, yeah, he made smart moves, but this whole trust in Tito faction was born. I'm not saying I don't trust in Tito. It's just then he makes these questionable decisions, and it seems like this series, every questionable decision he's made has come to pasture. Like you have the Edwin injury that forced Brantley into a DH spot. You have the Gio at third base fiasco last night. When you kept him for defense alone over a guy like Yandy who hits, and I don't have to preach to you about Yandy, Jim, but
oh, we'll get there. We'll get there today. I may start singing like wrestling tunes, but that's for another day.
It's just kind of ironic how every decision he made that was questionable leading into this series has come into play in these two games in New York.
Yeah, well, the Yankees, of course, the sad thing about the two games in New York, you look at the 1-0 loss where, obviously our pitching was stout, but we had opportunity after opportunity. Well, okay, not opportunity after opportunity, but we had, a one-out triple by Kipnis, who's part of this equation as well, playing center. And we can't get him home with JRam and Bruce. And then, of course, the 9th inning, runner on first and second, 1 out. And without a double play being made, again, JRam – no, I take that back. Jay Bruce strikes out. And Santana, if you look at that swing angle and you look at where he hit it
It was a great at-bat by Santana, too. He's put together the best at-bats of anybody on the team this series.
Yeah, and to think about this, and this could take us off on another tangent, if we do happen to lose the game tomorrow, and I don't think we will, but if we do happen to lose the game tomorrow, very well could be Carlos Santana's last game as a Cleveland Indian. So ponder that. Well, just made myself a little sad thinking about that. But all right, so let's look specifically at Giovanni Urshela. Obviously, if you take into account Francona trying to get Kipnis into the lineup and moving him to center field, Kipnis is as gamer a player as I've ever seen. And when I covered him at Kinston and when I lived in North Carolina, you want to talk about a guy working to be a good second baseman. He was it. And the question then was, could he move from center to second? Not a lot of people thought he could. Actually, a lot of people were saying he wasn't doing well, which wasn't true. All the boots on the ground said he was. He's clearly working hard. He makes a fantastic catch, a 4-star catch in game 1. But we've seen some let's be honest. Every ball that's hit the center, ground ball, fly ball, any ball, we have a little bit of a heart attack, and he kind of gives us one. His routes aren't very good. Obviously, you're putting a guy in a primary position in a playoff series. It seems insane to me, but you can kind of make – obviously the bat's been there, that makes some sense. You move JRam to second where that's his primary position. Then that makes sense. And you put a defensive third baseman at third base. Unfortunately, the downfall of that is offensively he's a hole. There's no other way to say he's a black hole at offense. So you have to have other people pick him up. And if he's not playing well defensively, you basically have, is, as was pointed out to me today, of a player worse than Michael Martinez playing in another playoff series. So let's talk about Giovanni Urshela. Some really interesting news coming out today that he has a sore leg. And I put quotes around that, but, I guess he got hit by a ball yesterday that he should have fielded. Are we going to see Yandy Diaz tomorrow? Is this his out without having to put Encarnacion on the DL? It looks like Encarnacion's going to play as well. Your thoughts on Giovanni, and give me percentage on what you think about Yandy Diaz. Do you think he plays tomorrow? Do you think he makes the roster?
I think that would be the move to make. I think you can afford to mortgage Giovanni Urshela for the ALCS to make that move tomorrow night, because of the rule where if a player hits the DL during the AL Division Series, they have to miss the next series. That's one of so I guess that's the rule, obviously, to keep teams from shuffling players to the DL. But I think they will ultimately make this move. We didn't hear anything, Jim, last night about Gio's sore leg until they got a night to sleep on it. Isn't that a little funny?
I mean, all of a sudden today, yeah. I mean, I honestly, I haven't been online this whole afternoon. I get online and I actually saw a tweet you made with the Gio news. It looks possible that Yandy's going to play tomorrow night. And I'm thinking, what am I missing? So it does seem kind of contrived, but, also at the same time, we've got footage of Edwin Encarnacion, running pretty well in the outfield. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean he can generate power, with that leg. I mean, that was a nasty, nasty sprain that we saw. But we are talking only a DH. I mean, as long as he can swing the bat and, hobble around the bases with his arm out like so, I think that's okay with us. But, we could possibly see a scenario tomorrow where we have Kipnis moving back to second. We have Greg Allen perhaps in center. If they don't bring Yandy up, then you of course move JRam back to third, or you keep everything as is and you just put Yandy at third base. I mean, defensively, have you seen anything from Yandy Diaz that makes you think he can't be spectacular?
No, he had a couple issues early in the year throwing the ball, I think, but it's funny, those contrived, like you talk about contrived, all the reports about him being a poor defender seemed contrived earlier this year. Like they were hedging against putting him on the major league roster. And
well, no, a lot of that came from Francona himself. Francona made a comment early on talking about his deficiencies at third base.
Right.
Yeah, and again, I'm not trying to come down on Francona, but there's a PR piece to all this that's kind of frustrating.
Yeah, and it could be Francona protecting his players a little bit and getting them on board with any decisions he makes too. They're going to listen to him say he's a poor defender and then understand why this bat isn't on the roster. But I've seen him go to his left as well as anybody this year to get ground balls. I mean, I think he had 3 or 4 plays throughout the year at third base dive into his left.
Mm-hmm. And let's not forget a couple of things. He's at high A and at double A, he was both rated the number 1 third baseman in the league. And granted, we're not talking about massive leagues with hundreds of third basemen, but that award is given by other managers and other coaches in that league, in those leagues. I mean, we're talking about a guy who's been awarded as a great third baseman, not even a good third baseman, a great third baseman, and every league he's played in except for AAA, only because he hasn't played a full season at AAA yet.
Right, and I mean, we're not talking like Carlos Santana is back at third base or Lonnie Chisenhall is dwindling away there. I thought we got enough of a sample size with the eye test this year to say this guy's not bad over there. He's not Giovanni Urshela, but he's not bad.
Well, I mean, and now, I mean, you can almost microcosm Giovanni Urshela into that game yesterday. I mean, there's no bigger fan. As big a fan as I am of Yandy, Mike Hattery can tell you I've been a pretty big Gio Urshela just because of the glove. I've been watching that glove for a long time in the minors. But, I mean, you can almost make a case that just in that one game alone, he's made a case for himself not being on the roster. I mean, his whole reason for being on the roster was that spectacular glove. And if we're not going to see it in the microcosm of the playoffs, you make a case that you've got to bring up the offensive bat because we're struggling offensively. How much can Yandy Diaz? You mentioned his ability defensively. Let's talk a little bit about the offense. Of course, his big knock is the ground ball percentage is extremely high, even now. And we saw a little bit of improvement there. And obviously, some quotes have been coming out of Columbus that they've been specifically working on launch angle. How can Yandy Diaz, just putting Yandy Diaz into the lineup, what's the one area or two areas offensively that he immediately helps?
He gives you an extra base hit candidate when he's up there. And I know he hits the ball on the ground, but he hits the ball hard on the ground. You've seen those graphics with his exit velocity. It's top 5 in the majors of people with so many batted balls. I don't know the exact number, but he's up there with your Joey Gallo and Aaron Judge's in exit velocity. So
yeah,
the ground ball thing is just frustrating from a standpoint of he hits it so hard. Why isn't he hitting it in the air? He could be two or three hitter on any team if he could get that ball in the air. But I mean, he still hit batting average is not a great stat, especially for a guy who hits the ball on the ground all the time. But you're still talking about a guy who was able to hit 60% grounders and 35, come up with a batting average of 350. I mean, that's insane in itself to me. You're hitting only 40% of the balls you hit in the air.
Okay.
But I kind of diverted there. That I kind of marvel at that. But he struggled a little bit in the early going in the big leagues, and he's kind of turned it on. I remember in that, I think it was the Boston series, towards the end of August when the win streak was starting, he started rifling balls off the right field wall like crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that, looking at what they're probably going to do with him in the offseason, I mean, he's a really enticing player. To me, as a third baseman, I mean, I know they've talked, the problem with him in AAA is he's, they've been bouncing him all over the place, but it appears as though they're sticking with him at third base. Which makes it seem like, he's a candidate who could be there long term. All right. So, obviously you've got with Diaz, a guy you can plug in, 6, 7, 8, 9. It looks like Brantley's going to sit. I mean, Edwin Encarnacion, are you expecting much from him tomorrow night?
I expect him to play, and he's a guy whose job it is just to hit. So it's not like you have to worry about that ankle in the field. And I know it was a gruesome ankle injury. I actually had to miss the game on Friday night, but I came home and I saw the highlight, and it looked bad. I thought he broke it, especially with being on crutches following the game. That was a scary sight.
But in the boot.
Your job is to hit the ball, and you worry about him getting into it when driving on that ankle. But I mean, he's a guy who has just straight hit for the last 7 or 8 years. So I don't think a few day layoff and a banged up ankle prohibits him from having a chance to contribute.
Well, I know both of us veer towards the metric side of things, but just looking at the lineup standpoint, just having him in the lineup in the middle there obviously lengthens your lineup, and when you're facing the potential, obviously Sabathia to start the game, a lefty. I mean, you want that lefty righty matchup, but obviously if the minute Sabathia struggles, you've got to imagine that Sonny Gray is going to get called on, who didn't get used at all yesterday. Now all of a sudden is coming in at 100%, without having to come in on 3 days rest. So, I mean, just from a kind of a threat standpoint, it seems like, with the way that Santana has been using his bat, and if we can get a little bit of offense from Lindor and from JRam, it does lengthen our lineup quite a bit, especially if you add Yandy Diaz to the lineup, and Kipnis is hitting the ball as well. I mean, so there's a lot of potential there. But let's look at the game specific tomorrow. I mean, as much as I said, if we lose the game tomorrow, I mean, we have the 1+, more than 1+. I mean, we're playing at home, 1, but we also have Corey Kluber on the hill. And I know that Kluber didn't look like Kluber. I know that there was a velocity drop that really came out of nowhere. I mean, it's not like we've seen a transcendental drop since, June. I mean, obviously that's not happened.
I want to make a note about that drop too, real quick, Jim. His fastball was down a tick on Friday night, but all of his secondary pitches were right where they normally are. So I would think that if it's an injury or a structural issue, that we would see a drop everywhere across the board.
Correct.
But it was just his fastball.
Yeah, and I mean, and you tend to see a velocity drop with if you're seeing it in one pitch, it tends to be someone pressing with said pitch.
Yeah, maybe he just had with all the hoopla leading up to him taking off a game, maybe there was just something mentally there. But this guy's been the best pitcher in the AL for several years. I'm not worried about him starting this game tomorrow night, and I'm not worried about a 92.5 mile per hour fastball average instead of 93.5.
Well, and he of course, the typical Corey Kluber. I kind of caught this on Twitter. I think maybe Meisel tweeted this out when he was asked if he had seen the video and if they'd figured out what was going on during game 2, and he said yes. And have you figured it out? A very simple And I guess that's about what you want. That's about what you want from Corey Kluber.
He's freaking great.
I mean, we are so blessed. I mean, at the end of the day, the only fear I have about tomorrow is that this season could end because, I mean, Kluber's the best pitcher, as you said, not just for this year, but you could make a case over the past 4 seasons there hasn't been a better pitcher in baseball, and his mentality is so spectacular. You look at some of the aces of the past, and there's scowls like Randy Johnson and like Roger Clemens, and Kluber isn't any of that. He's just an ice cold killer on the mound, and I'm going to miss that whenever he decides to hang up the spikes. But it'll be a pleasure seeing him on the hill. I mean, past him, we did have to dip into the bullpen a little bit, obviously. I mean, are you concerned about the pen? Are you concerned? We've seen some dents in the armor of Andrew Miller. Cody Allen's looked pretty good. I mean, I guess our perfect day tomorrow would see Kluber going at least 6, if not more. And then, of course, that rock-solid bullpen of Miller, Shaw, Allen. Do you see a scenario tomorrow where Corey Kluber's pitching great and he goes past 6 innings, or do you think Terry Francona is going to use that mode that he used last year in the playoffs, where you get that solid Kluber outing till 6, and then you bring in the lockdown bullpen, even though that bullpen has looked maybe a notch below what it was last year?
I think, Jim, the only way Kluber sees the 7th inning is if it's 7-0 Indians lead or something like that. My ideal scenario tomorrow is basically Kluber for 6, and then Miller and Allen for 3.
Yeah, well, I mean,
maybe Kluber goes 6 1/3, and then Miller comes in and mops up the 7th. I just think you'll see Kluber's day finish in that 6th to 7th inning, round 6 innings.
Yeah, I don't see him messing with that philosophy. I think the score, as you mentioned, is a big deal. I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, heading in tomorrow as we kind of head towards closing up shop. I mean, it's a game 5. It's an elimination game in Cleveland. The last time I think we had an elimination game in Cleveland that we won was against, I don't think it was in Cleveland. I think it was in 2017. I think it was against the Yankees in an ALDS. I mean, what's your fear? I mean, if you have one fear heading in tomorrow, obviously Sabathia. I mean, Sabathia could be looking at a fairy tale here with him coming back to Cleveland and beating his former team. But I mean, that seems like a fairy tale to me. I guess my big question is does he make it out of the first inning? I mean, I hate to be that confident that we're going to hit him, but
I'm not even super sure that if he's gives up a run in the 3rd inning, he makes it past the 3rd. I think there's going to be you might see the shortest leash imaginable on a pitcher tomorrow with CC. They have 5 guys in that Yankee bullpen that can come in and mop up innings.
Not to mention, the fact that
you're going to see Aroldis Chapman for 2 at the end of the game if it's a close game. You're going to see Chad Green immediately when Sabathia exits, probably. And I can't see Sabathia going past 4 innings tomorrow, unless he's, like you said, it's a score thing. But if this game is 1-0, 2-1, I can't see them risking it with CC much more than 1 to 1.5 times through the order.
So this is going to be a weird day tomorrow, man. You've got Kluber against basically the Indians version of their off day last year where they didn't have a starter and they were just throwing everybody at the Ryan Merritt starts, I mean,
it's weird. Why didn't they throw Gray?
It's insane. I mean, I think their hope is to get, I wouldn't be surprised to see Gray working in the pen when the game starts. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me at all. And it may be just one of those games where even Sabathia, if he can finagle his way, through an inning or two, that they just bring Gray in because he's fresh. I mean, I just can't imagine they want Sabathia this offense to see Sabathia a second time. So it could be just one of those scenarios. We see Sabathia the one time through the lineup. We see Gray one time through the lineup, and then they get to the bullpen if they get themselves a lead. I mean, I think scoring runs is key. I mean, I could see a scenario tomorrow where the Indians get 2 guys on base and they pull Sabathia before he even gives up a run. So I think that Sabathia is almost smoke and mirrors. So I don't know. This is going to be a very strategic game. I think the Yankees are going to be swinging from the ground up. And the one area where Kluber has struggled this year is the long ball, if there's been a struggle. I think obviously you're going to see their big bopper swinging for the fences because they need a lead. They get a lead and they can bring that bullpen in and do exactly what we did to teams last year. The opposite side of this is if the Indians can jump on them, and that's obviously the key for them. I mean, do you see that playing out this way? I mean, it seems like for Kluber, the Indians have been stout. They score first. I forget what the percentage is and has passed since June, but they have been jumping on teams with Kluber starts. I mean, how locked are you that we're going to the ALCS?
There is a part of me that is just terrified of tomorrow. I'm not going to lie. But right now I'm about 70-30.
Yeah,
I mean, there's a chance that Kluber just could come out and give up a couple home runs because they're a really good offensive team. Aaron Judge can go deep in the first inning and make it a 2-run game just like that. But go ahead.
Well, it just, kind of as you say that, it's been, I think my big curiosity kind of looking at the AL as a whole. You see Houston kind of walk through Boston, and I don't know that anyone was surprised by that. I mean, I think, Boston's starting rotation was decimated to an extent. They have Sale and they have Pomerantz, but past that, you've got, kind of a potpourri of starters, and in a very similar vein as the Indians last year. And Chris Sale has never been good in the playoffs anyways. Looking at all these teams in the AL, in particular, the 4 that were left, how good are the Yankees? I mean, with that bullpen and that powerful offense and that youth, really, I mean, youngest team in the playoffs, I think they're neck and neck with Houston on that. How good are the Yankees? I mean, there's been a lot of case being made that the Yankees are the second best team. And I think when you talk about the Indians, the Yankees, and the Astros, it gets to be kind of an interesting conversation. I mean, I still think the Indians, top to bottom, when healthy, are the best team in the American League. But how close are the Yankees right now? And how much does that piss you off?
They're really close, and they have a bunch of money coming off the books too, I think. So you're talking about not this next year, but the season after that, we could see Bryce Harper added to that roster. Okay. But no, they scared me more than Houston because Houston scores a bunch of runs, but the Indians pitch well. I feel like the Indians are Houston's worst matchup. But the Yankees scared me because their bullpen is just so deep. They don't have, and their starters aren't bad either. Tanaka had a rough year, but we saw on Sunday night, his splitter can just take him to dominance in a heartbeat. I mean,
if that splitter's around the knees, he's as tough a pitcher as there is in the American League.
He's probably hit or miss as anybody in the majors, but
sure.
They scared me more than the Astros personally, just because of their pitching and hitting combination. They're just very well-rounded. They were one of the top 3 offensive teams in baseball, and I think they had 6 relievers who averaged over 11 Ks per 9 this year.
Yeah, insane. I mean, it's insane. I mean, you could make a case they have 5 just grade A elite relievers. There's certainly 4. That some struggle with a couple of them kind of heading towards the playoffs, but they've panned out as well. I mean, this series has turned out, a friend of mine, a Boston fan, said, New York in 5, and it really pissed me off. And when we won the first two, I was ready to like kind of shove it down his throat. I'm sure he's going to listen to this and mock me all day tomorrow. But I don't know. I mean, they scared me a little bit because of the power that they have and their ability to just jump on teams. And I was concerned that there would be a game or two. I never in a million years thought they'd beat us in a game 1-0. I mean, that game to me was a heartbreaker because, like I said, Aaron Judge, of course, wins that game for him with a catch. I mean, what the hell?
Well, I didn't even get too mad at that. That was a pop-up that you're playing in a Little League field that is a pop-up, is a not thrilling pop-up in 29 other ballparks.
Yeah. That's just our luck, though.
That also spoils Carrasco's playoff debut, which was phenomenal.
Yeah.
His slider was as good as you see it. And then the changeup, I love Carrasco's changeup, that 89-mile-an-hour diving.
I mean, I continually make a case that when Carrasco is at his – the difference between Carrasco and Kluber, to me, is the consistency of elite pitching that Kluber has. Like when he goes on his runs, he's just as consistently great as you can get. Whereas I think Pete Carrasco, is as good or a little bit better than Kluber can be. I just think, I mean, arsenal wise, I just think I love Carrasco's arsenal. Look, I mean, I guess we're mincing words here. I mean, because you talk about Kluber's curveball. I want to talk a little bit about what he's going to be throwing tomorrow. You talk about the pitch that's carried him through his whole career and the usage this year of his curveball. You throw that in with the use of the two-seamer, and then you throw, anything that he throws that bends is just so elitely located. Is this the guy we're going to see tomorrow? I mean, we didn't even really get a good look at him in game 2. And comparing to obviously what we saw last year, I mean, it's kind of, his 2 worst games or his last 2 playoff games. I mean, this is the only reason why I would agree with you on the 70-30 is because his last 2 playoff games have been his worst 2 playoff games. I mean, we got to see a little bit tomorrow, but is it just one of those things where he just has to catch his breath? I mean, it just seemed off.
I don't think he's not the nervous type, or at least doesn't show it ever. But his curveball, he's going to rely on it heavily. And I actually think I know he got shelled on Friday night, but I think he matches up well with the Yankees, with them being a youthful team, because what he might do better than anybody else in baseball is keep hitters off balance with his pitch selection. I know he relies on his curveball a ton, and I love that. I love the curveball spikes, but it's just, you can see if you just watch the hitters' reactions to each pitch that they're taking against Kluber. It's my favorite part.
It's my favorite part of the game.
Yeah, I mean, it's
like they're watching a magician. It's like they're watching, Chris Angel like pull some sort of trick. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I love when you can tell they're looking curveball, the lefty, and he starts that two-seamer at their hip and runs it back. You just have no idea how to react. And with the Yankees youth, I don't think it's not talking about plate discipline, balls and strikes, but disciplined in the sense of sitting on certain pitches. And I think what could have happened Friday night is they were just guessing right.
Yeah.
And that's how baseball goes.
Well, especially in these playoffs, you guess right one game, and that's all it takes. So my suspicion is Kluber will have something all set and prepared. I mean, he's been great against the Yankees all season. He's been great in that stadium. Well, he's been great at home. So I think we'll see, hopefully, the elite Kluber, and hopefully it's enough. Hopefully the offense can pick it up. I mean, I guess we end it with this. Offensively, obviously the past 2 games, even going back to the, without the grand slam from Lindor, I mean, obviously we get I hate talking if we didn't have it, but, that was Lindor's one big hit in this series. I mean, if Lindor and JRam don't perform yesterday or perform tomorrow, offensively, I mean, how hard does it get for us?
We need them to get going because of the uncertainty with Edwin. And Lindor, I will say, has been hitting the ball. He struck out a lot more than he normally does, but a lot of his hits have been hard line outs, or he hit a flare to center yesterday that was he just missed a little bit that could have been in the opposite gap very easily. JRam is the one I'm more worried about, just because not that anybody should ever worry about him as a hitter, but he gets into these modes where I think he's a little too patient. He's never going to be a high walk guy, and he takes a lot of strikes and buries himself in these counts where he turns into fight mode. And that's what I've seen a lot from him in this series. And he
struck out a little too much for me. I mean, he doesn't usually strike out a lot, and he struck out a little too much for me.
I basically ditched the whole Tanaka game. Tanaka was filthy that night. I think a lot of people put way too much onus on the hitter in those scenarios, and sometimes the pitcher just can't be hit. And that's what Tanaka was. You would have liked to see him lay off those splitters, but as easier said than done.
Yeah.
How bad did Jay Bruce look in that game, by the way?
Oh, gosh. In one game, he went from being someone we're going to sign for a 4-year deal or a 3-year deal to
that was
all of a sudden the guys with 2 first names aren't getting a free game anymore, Gage. We're out the door. We're out the door.
And he's been fantastic the whole series, but he was missing balls by 7-8 inches.
You could tell when he walked up to the plate too. He just looked pissed off, like he knew what was going to happen. I mean, I just felt bad for him. But that's 2 first name guys got to stick together. That's all I'm going to say. That maybe we'll change the name of the podcast to the guys with 2 first names. Actually, that's not a bad idea.
No. The guys with 2 first names.
All right.
That way, Hattery.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure in some country, Hattery's got Hattery Johnson. I don't know. All right. We're going to close it up on that note. Gage, we finally did this. Here's what I promise. If they win tomorrow, obviously you got more games to do this with. If they lose tomorrow, sometime after that game, maybe once we get over it,
So next year.
Okay, so maybe not once we get over it.
Right.
Sometime at the end of the week, we need to have that reaction podcast where all the couth and all the calmness that we're showing tonight goes away.
Yep.
And we just open up the floodgates. This is when we pull out the mean tweets, because there have been plenty. All right. All right. Well, it was good having you on the pod. Your first official WFNY podcast, unless I missed one in the middle there.
No, first one. Thanks for having me on, Jim.
No problem. And obviously, we'd like to have you as much as you want to have, as much as you want to be on the podcast. Real quick, anything you're going to be putting out in the next few days that you'd like to plug, or anything that you've posted in the past couple that you'd like to plug?
I'm going to do something small on Kluber tomorrow. It's not going to be something overwhelming, but sometime tomorrow morning I'll get something out on Kluber and what to watch for in the game tomorrow night. But that's about it.
All right. Well, make sure if you're listening to this podcast, check WFNY. We've got tons of coverage from Mike Hattery, Michael Bode, Gage Will. I'd love to say me. maybe I'll write something again before the end of the season. But make sure you check out WFNY's coverage. It's as good as it gets. Of course, we don't only cover the Indians. We do cover the football team. I'm not even going to make a comment about that. But, the Cavs are kicking into gear as well. And, I was watching them a little earlier tonight. So Derrick Rose actually looking good. And I've got plenty to say about Derrick Rose. But let's get through the baseball season first. On that note, we'll see you soon. Go Tribe. Gosh, I hope we have another baseball game after tomorrow night. Peace.
Have a good night, everybody.